Hello everybody, welcome back or welcome to my channel. Today, as you guys can see, we are going to be going through the books that I just can't fathom only reading once in my life. And with a never-ending TBR that I'm constantly adding to, you might think, when do you have the time to reread books? And that's not really often. I don't usually reread books at this time of my life, but when I was younger, I reread the same like 5 books over and over again, because when a girl knows what she likes, you don't mess with the formula, you know? So for this video, we're gonna like break it up into kind of the theme of the books or like the genre. We're first gonna start off with romances. There's not a ton of these. Honestly, I think I could reread pretty much any romance that I've read and it would still be a good time. There's very few romances that I just did not like at all, but there's a couple that I feel like it's been a while since I've read them and I feel like I should pick them back up at some point. The first book I don't think anybody will be surprised about, and that is Ali Hazelwood's The Love Hypothesis. This book came out in 2021. I think that's when I read it originally, and I have not read it since, which is kind of crazy that it's been 4 years since this book came out. But hopping back into reading probably about like 2019, 2020, this one definitely helped push me into the reading world of like booktube and all of that. I don't think that this book could come down from a 5-star for me. If anything, maybe it'd become a 6-star, but I still want to reread it because it's been so long since I've read this one, and this was like the foundation of Ali Hazelwood's STEM romances. And I love like the tropes that are in this book. We got like grumpy versus sunshine, we've got like fake dating, light, easy to read. I absolutely adored this book when I read it originally, and I think it also touches on a lot of like imposter syndrome that people have, especially like women in the STEM field, and as one of those people myself, I can heavily relate to that. That's something that is very prevalent in the like STEM industry, is a lot of people feeling imposter syndrome. And I think romances that can touch on real subjects as well, even if they're not super heavy or dark, I think it just makes it even better. Though this book didn't come out that long ago, and again, I only read it 4 years ago, there is some nostalgia in this book for what booktube and book talk and all of that was at that point in time, especially like, you know, a year into a pandemic. Like, we were all just like putting our all into kind of random stuff, and booktube and book talk were really popping off at that time. I think that kind of like pulls you back into that, but not in like a negative way. I think it kind of it's very reminiscent of the time we were in, and I want to get back into that. And our second and only other romance that I have is The Bodyguard by Catherine Senner. This was my first ever advanced reader copy, not this book itself. I got the like ebook arc back in 2022, and I absolutely adored this book. Not only was this my first ever arc, but it was also my first Catherine Senner book, and it made me want to read more of hers. And I have started to pick up more of her work, but I will always say I want to continue reading more of her work because it is so easy to digest. Absolutely lovely. A bodyguard romance is already to die for, but when she's the bodyguard, even better. Absolutely, yes, will eat it up every time. Like, I'm sorry. And I do enjoy that this as well. This is a closed door romance. There's not like steam or spice, and it is kind of like that slow burn tension between them. You kind of build up to it, which we see a lot in romances these days, like especially like popular romances. I will always like that. I enjoy getting into the story and fully seeing their love like develop. And as a more lighthearted romance, it still doesn't sacrifice the emotional depth that's needed to actually feel connected to the characters and make them feel real and be able to like empathize with them. And I just think that this was done very well, and I would love to reread it. I again don't think that this would fall from its 5-star rating. Most of these are going to be 5 stars, maybe a 4-star or an unrated book by me, but either way, I feel like this would just be a really fast-paced summery romance to reread sometime soon, maybe. Though I don't have plans to reread any of these, I don't have some kind of specific deadline. These are just some books that I would 100% recommend, or that I'm trying to see if they were even worth it. I mean, even Emily Henry's little blurb on the front says, my perfect 10 of a book. So I would definitely recommend this one for anybody trying to get into like a nice romance, and I, again, want to reread it. So the second section is just one book. It is a mystery, and that is The Inheritance Games I ate this up in, I think, one sitting, maybe like 2 sittings. Very, very quickly devoured this book back in 2021, and I gave it a 5-star immediately. The reason I want to reread it is because I didn't actually get through the series. I started to read the Hawthorne Brothers, which is the second book, and I stopped halfway through every single time I picked it up. And I don't know if it was just because I was kind of in a reading slump or if I just did not like the second book, but there is quite a few books in the series now, and I feel like since I loved the first one so much, I want to get into the rest of the series. Maybe I'll just completely DNF the rest of the series and only like the first one in the end. I don't know. As somebody whose favorite board game of all time and one of my favorite movies, though Pride and Prejudice still holds the top spot, of course, is Clue. Like, I actually have a Clue game. You can't see it, but it's right here, like right here on this thing. You guys have probably seen it plenty of times before from one of you lovely friends. Thank you for that again. I, again, devoured this book. I think it was like escape room and morally gray hot brothers mixed together. And I think that that's kind of genius. Also, sorry, I called the second one the Hawthorne Brothers. I think that's the third one. The Hawthorne Legacy is the second one. That's the one that I could not get through to save my life to even get to the Hawthorne Brothers, which I think is the third. I think that's the third one. I don't own the third one. I only own the first and the second one, so I'm not actually sure what the rest of them are called. There's also like the Final Gambit. There's like a whole slew of books in this series now, but I do want to go back and see if I can remember all the puzzles that they were solving in this book. It again has been like 4 years since I read this book. I think I read it August of 2021 if I remember correctly, and I gave it 5 stars immediately again. And I do think that I've gotten a bit harsher in my rating, and I think that'll probably continue to happen the more I read. I definitely gave a lot of 5 stars back in 2021 that I don't know would still hold up now, but I think I would still recommend this book even though I'm not sure that my rating is concrete. But hopefully soon we'll be able to see, because I do want to try and read through some series that I never finished or completely DNF them, which will probably happen soon because there are so many series on my TBR that either need to go or be finished, honestly. Our next little section is going to be a little random, but it also, these books kind of all go together in a specific way, but you'll kind of see that theme as I'm showing you the books. The first one, I also don't think this one's going to be a surprise, is The Hunger Games, and that includes Catching Fire and Mockingjay, because I recently read Sunrise on the Reaping, and I think about a year ago I read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I will always love the Hunger Games series, that is no question, but I do want to go back into it as an adult. I did read these more than once when I was younger, but even then you're still not completely evolved into your consciousness and being able to decipher dystopian fantastical aspects of the Hunger Games with what is kind of real life, which I think we also see kind of in like The Handmaid's Tale, which I haven't actually read the book, but I've watched the show. I've watched the entire show except for the season that's currently coming out. I thought they were done with the show, but that's a whole side rant. There are a lot of things in this book that kind of relate to our political climate currently, and even like our economical climate. I think these dystopian books that kind of prophesize what we're going through currently, one, they can be kind of hard to read because your mind like can't comprehend that something that's supposed to be fiction can mirror reality in a sense. Of course, it's not exactly the same, but I think you guys know what I mean. Like, there are pieces that definitely mirror our current reality, and it's scary to see, absolutely. I think that can be a deterrent to want to read these kind of books, because you want, when you're reading, you kind of want an escape. You don't want to have to deal with reality all the time. Of course, like, there are a lot of people who don't read romance, they don't read fantasy, they only read nonfiction or real life shit. And I mean, I applaud that. I read nonfiction, but not all the time, because sometimes I want to get away from the world, and especially right now, the world is kind of, again, shit. But I think rereading these in the mindset that we're currently in would be really interesting, and I want to see kind of how that morphs the story. But at the same time, I don't want to lose the nostalgia of reading these books and just enjoying them for what they are, because I mean, Suzanne Collins' work in these books is just chef's kiss. And keeping in theme here, I want to reread John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men. This is an 100-page book that is absolutely enthralling and kind of punches you in the chest a little bit. And I think any of you guys who also had to read this in school would agree with that fact. Of Mice and Men illustrates a lot of power dynamics, and though this is written as a book in the past, it still, again, reflects a lot of things we're seeing now. I had to read this book back in school, and I definitely recognized and analyzed a lot of the same things about this book, especially because in school we are taught to analyze the books that we're reading. But I also want to go into this book with, again, the current political mindset we're in, and I think it'd be really interesting to see kind of the display of how power is nowadays back to when this was written back in the 1930s. And I think that, again, it's still very prevalent now. I think that that's an amazing thing about literature. Like, this was written almost 100 years ago. Like, we are nearing at 100 years ago at this point, and it is still so relevant today. And that's something that I just adore about books, and I will always want to reread books that make you think in that kind of way. Keeping with that book especially and the theme here, another book that I really want to reread is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. I can't find my copy anywhere. I don't know where it ran off to, but especially because how we're seeing justice play out in our society right now, I think it would be really interesting to reread To Kill a Mockingbird. It was a very powerful read then, but I think it would be even more heartbreaking and eye-opening to read it now, again, especially because I think it still mirrors a lot of things that we're seeing now, and I think those kind of books help people see and get that disillusionment to how things aren't always guaranteed in this world, and that especially when it comes to justice, not everybody's definition is the same. Again, To Kill a Mockingbird was written a while ago, and it's still, again, a very important book I think that everybody should read. And I love that I had to read it, even though, again, it is a intense book, especially for a child. But I think that the things that we learn from these books and this type of literature is very important to who we grow to be and how we grow to learn. And I think that's really beautiful. I don't know. The next book would be The Giver, which I read back in middle school. It has been so long, and I really want to reread it. This, again, I think there are a lot of mirror aspects to our reality with the increasing amount of censorship in our world. I think that, again, books like this can be very, very important. But I think where we have books like The Handmaid's Tale, this book is also kind of a warning on everybody needs to open their eyes to the world and kind of the timeline that things take to become, in a way, like the world in The Giver. And I think that's also something you could kind of see in movies like The Purge. It's like, how did they get to that point as a society? And I think that that's something that's very intriguing to read in a novel. So I definitely want to reread this one. This one's probably near the top of my list at wanting to reread. This is probably one of the ones that's been the longest since I've read, so would definitely like to reread this in the next year or so. Another book that I don't actually have the physical copy of, which I will eradicate that hopefully soon, is Lord of the Flies, and that book is kind of disgusting. That book absolutely wrecked my empathetic mind as a child, but I again think it's a very important book to read at least once. And you might be like, then why would you want to read it again? Because I think that, and this was kind of this theme of this section, is reading books that are banned books and books that are continually being talked about with censorship are extremely important to read and reread and keep prevalent in our society. I think that is a very important thing about a lot of literature, is they need to be pushed. They need to be shown, highlighted. Of course, we're all gonna want to highlight all the romance and cutesy books that we read on the daily, but I think it's also important to continually highlight these types of books that can make you think and also be able to be analyzed in a different sense. Like, of course, Lord of the Flies in and of itself is just a book about boys and their chaos and how they choose to survive this terrible situation. You could just see it as that surface level, but it also has that deeper meaning of, like, the beast that we fear is actually within all of us, and it could happen to pretty much anybody. Obviously, not everybody is going to make the same choices that the boys make in The Lord of the Flies, but I think it gives us a really intense and important illustration of civility and how we picture being civil human beings. It can get flipped on its head even just because you've been put in a dire situation. And so I feel like I want to read it again as an adult, because again, I read it as a teenager in school, just like a lot of these, and I want to see how, since my mind has developed even more, how I reanalyze the story. And then to kind of switch from that into a lighter note, we're going to talk about some fantasy books to get away from all that traumatic reading that I want to reread and do to myself again. But at least this time it'll be like on purpose, because a lot of those books I had to read. It wasn't a choice. So the first fantasy that I want to reread is The High Mountain Court. This came out in 2021. That is when I read it. And this book is actually a part of a series that I don't own, and I actually didn't know it was going to be a series when I first read this book. And I would definitely be interested to reread this one, and if I still really love it, because I also gave this a 5-star. Again, I was pretty loose with the 5 stars back then, even though it was only 4 years ago. I've kind of developed a little bit. But this book, again, has got that slow burn to the romance. You're kind of building up to it, and I also want to see like how it grows and develops in the other books, if they are about the same characters. Like sometimes in fantasy or romance series it switches characters for the romances, so I would be interested to see how this continues to play out and how the magic system kind of develops as well, because sometimes in fantasy books the magic system can be very confusing. But I devoured this one. I feel like I've said that so many times in this video. I'm sorry, don't take a shot for every time I say devour, because I apologize, I say it too much. But I kind of love that enemies to lovers, where it's kind of like predestined enemies. Like, she is a witch and she's like possibly the last witch of her kind alive, and then the king of the court, he has placed a bounty on all these witches' heads and wants them all gone. He does not want them in his kingdom. But then they both fall in love, you know, like that is the kind of romantasy that I will eat up every time. Absolutely. This book also, I think that the court system in it, and being the High Mountain Court, the court and political system in this book as well, is quite interesting and intricate in a way that's not confusing, and I really like that in a fantasy book. So I would definitely be interested to reread this one and get into the rest of the series. The other fantasy that I really want to get back into is Ember of the Night. I do believe that this has other books in the series that I don't own and I haven't read yet, because I didn't actually know it was going to be a series. But this is a YA paranormal fantasy, and I kind of love that demonic with human energy. I mean, of course we see that in like Twilight. We've got like vampires and humans together, and that whole kind of world. I love that in kind of a paranormal fantasy, and I think this one's really well done for a YA. But again, this was one of the first fantasy books that I read getting back into fantasy, so I immediately gave it 5 stars. I really enjoyed it, and I did read it really fast. I will say that this book does have some trigger warnings to it and content warnings about emotional and physical violence, suicidal thoughts, etc. So if you wanted to get into this book, I would definitely read up on that first. There is an author's note at the beginning that does kind of outline that, but I do think that the author handled it in a way that was sensitive to the topics, and for the most part, obviously a lot of it can be really hard to read, but I think this one was just like an easy read for me, and I would love to get back into it and see if I still think that the rating holds up, especially because I have strayed quite far from YA. I don't usually read YA so much anymore, even though Good Girl's Guide to Murder is on my June TBR, and that is a YA mystery, because I can still enjoy them, but they're just not what I pick up all the time. So yeah, those are the 10 books that I really want to reread and see if their ratings still hold up, or go back into the nostalgia of it, or probably some heartbreak as well. I just find that these are some really interesting reads, with some a little bit more fun and less intense. And I'm curious if any of you guys have any books that you're really dying to reread sometime soon. So let me know down below. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys in the next one.